right, friends. Um, it's time for the last intellectual meal of this forum, the dessert. A panel on mission-oriented innovation. The dessert, no pressure whatsoever on the panelists. Let's welcome them on the stage. Dr. Tiret Tönerist, please. OECD, lead on anticipatory innovation governance and missions. Please. Neville Reeve, Head of Sector, European Commission, DG for Research and Innovation. Neville joins us through Zoom, and we'll see him in a moment. Rainer Kattel, Professor of Innovation and Public Governance at University College London. Professor Kattel also joins us via Zoom. We'll see him shortly. Johanna Franzen. Johanna is Program Manager at Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency. Welcome. And John Abel, Technical Director, Office of the CTO, Google Cloud Platform. Please. And the moderator for this panel, Kaspars Roškalns, Director General of the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia. Kaspars, welcome. I do not envy you. The last panel on the second day of the conference, you're up for a medal, irrespective of how it goes. But it's going to be great. Thank you very much.
It's going to be great. Thank you very much. So today we're here, and in the 3Cs Summit, it's all about the investment. It's all about investment in three sectors: in energy, in digitalization, transport, logistics. However, what we talked about previously quite a lot is how to make the leapfrog forward. So how to make the infrastructure, either in digital infrastructure or the infrastructure in energy or infrastructure in the transport logistics, the one step ahead. So we should not create the infrastructure of the past in these 12 countries. We should focus on the infrastructure of the future. How to get there, and that's a difficult question. Obviously, one of the buzzwords is innovation. Everybody talks about the innovation now, and can we align? Can we align the mindset of one country to innovate in one direction? Can we align the mindset of 12 countries to innovate in one direction? And how to actually get it done? So today, here I'll start with our great panelists. You already heard all the intros, and the theme for the panel is obviously the buzzword, the mission-oriented innovation, and the question is, and I'll start with the question to Professor Rainer Kattel, and the question is, if we see that this is quite a lot of challenges and actually a lot of conflict in between the investment. The big investment leaves normally the big footprint, and the big footprint is definitely an issue for society. However, the investment is needed, and this is all the conference is about the investment, how the investment can provide the well-being, how the investment can provide, let's say, the drive for the economy to the future. So the question is, can you maybe, Professor Rainer Kattel, can you define on the mission part, can it be bring together the industries, the science, the government, the society, and build a foundation for this fundamental change? Is that an option for the mission? And maybe you can mention what is the key, let's say, the key parts for the mission, what must have to something we can call the mission. Ryan, please.
Yeah, thanks for this question, and hi everybody, and sorry for being on Zoom. Yeah, so as we are at the end of two-day conference, so I think we have to try to be as entertaining as quick as possible. So when I think about missions, of course, we very often go back to the original idea of missions, which is the moonshot by Kennedy, and of course the comparable moonshot in the Soviet Union as well. So the space race of 1960s that eventually gave us a lot of the digital economy that we are now living in. And so, yeah, if you look at the two sides of the Iron Curtain, we had, iPhone on the other side, on one side, and then Skype on the other side, if you will. And of course, that nobody set out to create an iPhone, but they wanted to create a moonshot, so they wanted to go to the moon and back. So it was very much about technology and investment into technology that then created as a spillover this massive new economic sectors. And I think this is what we try to replicate today as well. So we try to actually steer the economy to invest into the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to these solutions, so that technology innovation is geared towards these big challenges that we are facing rather than just sort of anywhere we want to go. And I think, again, the hope is that by directing investments, public and private, into these big challenges like climate emergency, we create new economic activity, we create new business models, we create new jobs, new opportunity. I think bringing these two things together is really the key idea of missions, is that we provide for a larger technological innovation direction, and this hopefully then will create also lots of new opportunities. So in that sense, the key to this idea of missions is this, to create a massive field of experiments. So if you think about like zero carbon energy, for instance, so it's not about one technology like it was in the space race, if you will, getting to the moon and back, but it's about a number of technologies like, wind, solar, but also households, the way we consume energy. It's about waste, it's about mobility, it's about all of those sectors, and somehow bringing them together under one umbrella of zero carbon energy. And of course, you want, as a policymaker, but also from a business perspective, you want lots of multiple, experiments, innovations going on at the same time, rather than settling on one technology or one solution. And I think that's really what the EU is trying to do as well, with these 5 mission areas where you have essentially very bold cross-sectoral goals, like climate neutral cities, or adapting to climate change in regions, or also the soil deal for Europe, what's called creating those living lab and lighthouse projects for transitions to healthy soils. So it's all about this idea of trying to create new direction where both business and public sector are investing together and creating through those investments these new opportunities for jobs and business models to emerge.
Thank you. You touched on 2 very important points. One is obviously that there's a lot of unknowns in the missions, that if you try to innovate, you never know what is going to be the end result of that. And the other part is, then I would like to go to the next speaker, so to the Dr. Piret Tonjurist. And I hope I pronounced that quite okay. So the question is, if we need to align for the mission, and actually I want to a little bit rephrase the yesterday's investment panel. That was the first panel, and we're the last panel. They started, do we really need like a huge crisis, like currently in the war in Ukraine, to get on the board for one idea? And the question is, how is that from the OECD perspective? You evaluate a lot of missions in a lot of countries, and what are, let's say, the key results, the key takeaways, the successes and the failures, and at the end, can you wrap it up with figuring out, can we simulate the huge crisis so we can align, or the crisis must be real and today so we will understand?
Thank you, Kaspar. It's actually a fantastic question, and very much, do we need a crisis to reach a mission? Because the moonshot that Rainer was talking about was also a competition between Cold War competitors of different fences that wanted to reach the moon and colonize the moon first, and it was also coming from a crisis. So do we need to have a crisis to actually get to a mission? So what is a good mission? A good mission is something that is clear direction. We understand the problem, that there's a societal problem that needs to be solved, and towards that problem, businesses and business models can actually innovate and solve that. So what a good mission actually starts with, and based on an evaluation and our work that we do at the OECD with very different countries, is collective sense making. Do we understand the problem at hand, the mission? Do we understand the target that we actually want to reach? By which time frame we want to reach it for? Do we have businesses and companies and investors, but also the problem owners, not only Kaspars and LIA and the innovation agencies, on board understanding the target that we want to reach? So if you understand the problem, that in terms of pollution of the Baltic Sea or other sea areas, we want to reach towards that end, or energy transition, that we need the energy transition to happen now, the problem is clear, it's hurting, and we have a common sense around it between the businesses and different partners, then a good mission actually starts from there. And I think that the successes and failures that we have seen are really connected to that starting point, that we have a clear mission that activates, we have collective sense making between businesses and different partners around those issues. But then actually the real work starts, that we have to have also the connection between, high-level policies, programs that government usually is very good at doing, having really ambitious political goals, but then there also needs to be work on the ground. So how to connect, and what we've seen in our examples from top sectors, from the Netherlands, from Germany, and their high-tech strategy, is to how to connect those very lofty programmatic ideas about, these are the problems to be solved, to the real projects on the ground. So how does a project, for example, that LIA is doing with businesses, how is that contributing towards the mission? How are those portfolios aligned? Businesses have portfolios towards their aims, so do missions. They need to have portfolios in terms of understanding how specific projects and innovation and experiments contribute to those missions at hand. And it's not always as easy as, in terms of government to actually do that work, to go from on the experimentation on the ground to actually the program evaluation as well. Usually things tend to go wrong because governments tend to love to talk about the programmatic and the policy level and not so much on the implementation and actual working on the ground level as well. And last but not least, we also have to have evaluation in terms of understanding, are we going into the right directions? So are we reaching that goal? A good mission always has an endpoint. Kaspars has an endpoint in 5 years' time connected to the mission, and it doesn't have to have very complicated KPIs. Either you succeeded or you failed. In a sense that you create an innovation experimentation pace, you either reached the moon or you didn't. The person came back alive and safe, or they didn't make it back to the Earth. So there has to be a feedback system and understanding that you either reached the goal, solved the problem, or did not. And during that process, you can also have a lot of experimental space, because a mission approach doesn't really mean that you have to have, as Rainer said, one technology, one solution. Try whatever you want to try, as long as you can say, yes, we made the goal, and Kaspar gets his answer that is yes. So you have to have, for example, in Finland, they're working with mobility as a service, and as part of that mission space, a lot of experiments and experimentation is actually funded. We don't really care what is experimented on in a mission-oriented approach, as long as the societal issue is solved. And so 1,000 ships can be launched in terms of actually getting to the results, and many new innovation ideas can come from it as well. But do we need a crisis? Do we need the crisis? I think that the understanding of crises comes from collective sense-making. We could have understood that there would be a scenario of Ukraine already happening. It wasn't actually something that was unforeseeable. It is not unforeseeable that we're going to stand in Latvia by the sea with our feet wet, maybe in this hall, because of climate change. The collective sense making is actually making those crises that are really real in terms of wet feet here in this hall because of climate change, and making the reality of we don't want to have that to happen. So we have to actually create the urgency and understanding of the real impacts of those crises today, rather than live through Ukrainian situation and scenarios in practice. So we need to anticipate and think a little bit about the future of those realities of the crises to actually create missions that work.
Thank you very much. If we continue on, elaborate on this. Again, two things. One is about how to communicate the mission to society, and I'll get to maybe that a little bit later, to how to create urgency and so. However, I also heard quite a lot about the approach to innovate. It means how to try a lot of different things and either send somebody to the moon and get it back or not. Therefore, on this kind of elaboration, I would like to involve Neville Reeve from European Commission, from EU missions, and which is coordinated like a pooling of the necessary resources in terms of funding, programs, policies, and regulations. So, Neville, the question is, on the mission approach, what we heard so far, it should be crisis. It should be maybe managed in communication, that we know the crisis is coming. Maybe it's not at our doorsteps, but we should plan ahead and communicate that. However, as we don't know how to exit from the crisis, the question is on the how's the EU perspective on the flexibility, because obviously working in Latvia, being a part of the government, or let's say the part of the Ministry of Finance, it's not that always that flexible. If we set ambitious goals and do not achieve them, then you could get run in some trouble. And in this perspective, I see the missions is something that you allow to innovate, and innovation by default means part of the funds, part of the energy that you are dedicated will not become true, will fail. So what's the EU perspective on that? Is the mission-oriented approach is going to be the future, and is it going to be more flexible than currently? And at the end of the day, how do you see, is this the new and systemic way of innovating?
Yeah, very good question again. I don't actually think that this question of this point about the tension between doing innovative, challenging, potentially unsuccessful things in the context of an innovation policy is brand new to missions. Of course, if you look back at the context of many evaluation reports over the years of the framework program where I work, you will see constantly this reference to the need to be a little bit more unstructured. And of course, this connects fundamentally with the question of why you actually invest in public funding of research in the first case. In terms of answering your question, are the missions approach going to be something we see a lot more of? I mean, I want to be a little bit challenging by saying, in fact, that although, of course, it's new for us in the way we present it, and I think it's a very powerful narrative, attracts a great deal of interest. Of course, many of the things which we're doing, we've already been doing for quite a long time indeed. So if it's about using all the policy levers, mobilizing resources from different areas, directionality, yes, we've been doing that before. Of course, trying to connect up different policy areas, coherence, coordination, we've been doing that before. Engaging with a different range of stakeholders and actors, communities, different spaces, different networks. Yes, we've been doing more of that, doing that in the past. Experimentation, I just mentioned that, of course. Foresight, all of these things I think are sometimes referred to as sort of transformational innovation policy. We've been doing a lot of that for a long time. Where I think missions actually achieve something different, of course, it provides a longer term framework in which to operate. We set this up and our target's to 2030 with our missions, and we bring it all together as well. So it's different in the sense that, you know, this is all on the same page, and perhaps we learn from the past of how we could have done these things more effectively. So you're saying, is it part of the current? Is it likely to become something we see on a permanent basis? Yes, I think so, and I think it's just extending in the direction which we've been going for a very long time.
All right. But then the follow-up question, like what KPIs and the key results are you expecting or maybe planning, foreseeing in the European Commission mission initiative? What's the KPIs that we will see quite soon?
Okay, well, I mean, we tried to set these missions up with the big KPI being the title itself. I mean, and it wasn't so easy. Going to the moon and back is a very nice, simple one. Man on the moon works very well. We couldn't quite succeed to the same level. I think, you know, 100 climate neutral and smart cities is probably a one which works the best. The others, okay, you know, we tried. You see in the implementation plans for all of these missions, there's a great deal of work on this already. I guess there's from our side of things, and it's a key problem I think we have, or a challenge. Let me put it in more positive sense. A challenge we have is you've both got the R&I dimension where we're quite good at also already measuring progress, but we've got to think about the fact that these missions are substantially more than R&I, and so how we set up our indicators, our KPI, our monitoring system is absolutely critical, that it goes beyond research and innovation, and we're not there yet. I mean, this is actually what you could try and summarize the work we've done with our missions over these last few years, or the last 2 years, 2.5 years. We've got them launched, and it took much longer, I think, than perhaps we realized in order to get all of the governance, the coordination, the vertical and horizontal aspects of that set up. Where our focus is over the next couple of years is building those portfolios and at the same time setting up that sort of monitoring framework. Because I think, because this connects very much with what Pierrette said just a moment ago, the way in which you monitor performance is actually so crucial to the way in which you can actually manage the mission, you know, providing that flexibility, which is an inherent part of this mission's approach.
Right, thank you. So I got the point that we're at the beginning of the road, and the launching part took quite a lot of time, and obviously that is something that I want to talk with somebody from the private sector here, from John. Yeah, so we talk quite a lot about the innovation part and quite a lot about this ESG, and the first question is on the private sector's responsibility on sustainability, and there's one part that is legislation part, and there's one part with stakeholder part, and how the Google deals with that.
Yeah, first of all, it's amazing being back in the region. I forgot how much I like it here. Yeah, it's fantastic. I suppose where we start, I just want to pick up a point that's been raised about failure. Because I think before I go into how industry works, I do emerging technology at Google, so I look sort of 3 to 5 years out. I accept failure, because if I'm not having failure, I'm not pushing hard enough. The thing I learn from it is I always want to learn. I always want to learn from what I'm doing. And one of the things that we in the world need to do is collaborate on things that work and don't work. And specifically the things that don't work, learn from it. And I think when we're looking at the budgetary cycles, when we're looking at investment, we have to accept that some aspects will not yield what we expected. And that's okay. That's okay. As long as we take away from that key aspects that we can take into future development. If you think about technology, everything is about the marginal gains of improvement. You know, the moonshot never started with the moon. It started with human flight, the Wright brothers. Then what happened is it started looking at power, of how you can power a plane. Then you started looking at how you get it higher, and so over that point, we remember the moonshot, but we need to remember there was marginal steps along that journey to get there. And through that, they learned to tack and dive and move about. What industry's responsibility is actually we want to collaborate. I think the important point, and the thing that I learned from Google, is if you can get multiple parties on a common agenda to work in partnership with at least an understanding of what is the outcome, then actually that's a greater possibility of success or understanding of failure than trying to work isolated. One of the key things we do at Google is for innovation, we try to remove the barriers that means we can innovate faster. Because at the start of innovation, you just don't know what's going to come out. You have no idea. So why putting in regulatory processes or policies when we just really don't know what we're dealing with? But we've also got to make sure that we're ethical. We've got to make sure that we understand what we could be achieving. So I think there's a careful area here. But when I hear innovation, when I hear sustainability, what I hear is that we need to do it more collaboratively as one team. We're not separate on this world. We all live here together. We only have one planet. We better make sure that we work together.
Right. And the follow-up question on the collaboration within the Google. Obviously, how many employees you have at Google?
150 plus thousand now.
150K, yeah. That's pretty much the size of the public sector of Latvia. Therefore, how do you deal with that? How do you align? I do not hear about the crisis day on day in Google. Maybe you have, but we do not hear that. So, however, you somehow align them. What's the process there?
Well, the first thing is that when you come to in Google, we base everything around OKRs, objective key results. What we want to make sure is that every Googler is focused on what they're going to be famous for, not like if they're famous for delivering the best, in my case, emerging technology. I'm not going to build the best database in the world. That's not my job. That's someone else's job. Well, I'll collaborate with them. I'll work with them. So what you want to make sure is everybody can discover each other. So you make sure collaboration is natural and not forced. And I think one of the things that we need to do going forward is make sure that everybody has a common understanding, a clear message that was mentioned in the first sentence, but also make sure we all understand what we're doing together and making sure that we understand how we can support each other. There's no point of us trying to do this in isolation. And one of the things we do in Google is everything we've ever done is discoverable by any employee. There's no barriers to information, because information allows people to accelerate growth faster and success. Because it's really annoying if you go and do a piece of innovation and someone only did it a couple of months ago and you tread the same steps as them and you fail the same as them. It's like, well, you've not learned anything. So having the ability to make everything discoverable and learn and make sure that everybody can find the objectives that you're going to be famous for allows you to discover together.
Right, so the total transparency is the key. That
yes.
Easy access to information, total transparency, and that helps to align.
Yeah, and I also think the thing I like about what we do at Google is that we realize that we have a very clear company message, which is make the information universally accessible for all. And it's something that's our principle. That's what we're famous for. Everybody has their own individual why along that journey. So all of our individual missions align back to our overall mission. And actually that's key as well, to make sure there's alignment and make sure that there's transparency across that. But, the world needs us to go much faster, especially when it comes to sustainability. The planet isn't going to wait for us to catch up.
All right. Joanna, on Vinnova, has been working on implementing the missions, and actually not only working on that, but also launched a handbook on mission-oriented innovation. Therefore, even as Sweden is not a part of 3Cs initiative, we are still here because we, from the 3Cs countries, we want to learn something from those who did something, and then we can understand, was it a success or a failure? So could you share the experience from the practical side or the biggest challenges on how to make the mission-oriented innovation the process as itself?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Great to be here. First time for me in Riga. The challenges with experimentation and mission-oriented innovation. We started out in 2019, knowing just about nothing about mission-oriented innovation, more than that we had the framework from Mariana Mazzucato in our hands. And we started looking at that and thinking about how to work with this as an innovation agency. So a couple of years followed with a lot of experimentation within ourselves, in our own organization, but also collaborating massively with a lot of stakeholders out in the system. So we started with 2 pilot areas, one around mobility, which is like a core for us at Vinnova. We've been working with that as long as we've been around. And the food area, which is completely new and hasn't been addressed in a sort of strategic way before. So we started to sort of find out what are these areas about, and how could we as an innovation agency innovate how we innovate around this, and what needs to be in place. A lot of involvement with the dialogues, processes, workshops, collaboration in crossover everywhere. It was very fun, exhausting, and sometimes difficult, but also very rewarding, I think. We learned a lot. I wouldn't say that we have the handbook on mission-oriented innovation. We have one of them. There are many now. But when we started, we were quite alone, I think, in trying this out. And that was daunting, but also exciting. On the practical side, I think you need to have a lot of curiosity with you, a bit of fearlessness, maybe, a good understanding within your organization that this is new, this is experimental, it won't deliver the things that we're used to, it might deliver other things, and be open for that, and also have some understanding around that funding isn't everything, even if you're a funding agency. There are a lot of other things that we can provide for our stakeholders to help them to connect and get together. But we also need to change our way of working. We can't expect from the system outside to do all the difficult things and we go on with business as usual. We need to change how we approach the system, how we fund projects, what we expect from them, how we evaluate all parts of being in an innovation agency.
All right. So you have 2 areas, cities and food, and then the mobility. Sorry, mobility and then the food. The question is to have the mission, you have to be passionate about, and you have to drive the innovation forward. And maybe two sides of the question. The first of all is, how did you engage the society, and what kind of level did you do that on both directions? And from the other side, how many missions can you have? Because the question is, how many things can you really be passionate about?
Well, I guess the last part depends on the person. I don't know how many. I guess it depends on the complexity of the question that you're addressing. And we wanted to work with system innovation and address wicked problems. And I don't think there are that many questions like that for an innovation agency to address. So, but for us, I think we've been a small team, and I think that's part of why it has worked out as well as it has. Not more than 2 persons in the core team, and then a design team of 3 people. I don't think that you can expect them to, that sort of group, to drive more than maybe 2 missions, maybe 4. If you stretch it. But of course, as long as you're piloting, and we've been constantly piloting everything, it takes more time and resources. So when you get used to it and sort of get a hang of it, maybe you can have more. I don't know.
Okay, so small and agile teams, that's the answer there.
I would say yes. Then it's of course a bit challenging when you need to meet a lot of people. But on the other hand, you don't need to have a complex information gathering, sharing structure, because you're always there in the middle.
All right. Getting back to Piret, obviously the Latvia defined the mission C 2030, and we launched it last year, and we heard that the European Commission launched it, and 2 years have progressed, and there's still way to go forward, because the launching part is not actually the easy part. So the question is, like, what are the what the OECD thinks. What would be the crucial, the next steps, how to, after the launch, how to move forward with the mission? What are the key elements that should be? We have the goal, we know where do we want to get, we have the launch, what are the steps that should be taken? If you know where do you want to go, and you started.
So indeed, I agree with the other speakers that you have to assign responsibility and ownership to at least someone to drive the mission, be it a small agile team, for example, that really has the goal also to get to the end result, 2030, that it gets done. That's, I think, that the really, really important thing. And I think if you are actually, because we're talking about involvement and engagement and things, I live in the real world, I'm very pragmatic. You're not going to get everybody on board at the same time. So when you're starting a new mission, when you're starting this journey, try to get to the critical mass of stakeholders who really believe in the mission, be it from the industry, be it from the government, be it from the partner side. So don't expect everybody to fall on their knees and say, this is the best things and sliced bread. Not everybody is going to be there at the same time. Just get to the critical mass of people and stakeholders that are a must to start moving, and start moving with them right away. So successful missions that we have seen are basically the ones that are good at demonstrating, that good at producing evidence already that we can actually get this ball rolling. So start doing, demonstrating, experimenting, funding those experiments. And those who are kind of sitting back and, are not on board, usually they come on board when the first evidence comes in, because people get jealous in terms of new business opportunities when you solve problems actually are coming alive and you can actually see it coming on board. So those who are sitting with their hands, covered and who are not there at the table or saying that we don't really understand or we're not there yet, those will come on board in the second or third wave when you're actually doing the work. So that's why you need the agile teams who are responsible are actually getting there, but also the seed funding of experimentation and demonstration to get moving towards where you want to go. And this is not kind of, specific to public sector. This is also how private sector companies, in terms of solving problems or problem mindset or, of innovating within companies as well. Not all innovation in public sector and private sector has to be mission driven, but we can do a lot of work connected to that. And another piece of advice I would really want to say is that do not make it over complex. The amount of strategies, programs and things governments are able to produce is unbelievable. It is layered and nested on top of each other. And as Neville can say, we are doing everything, but the problems are still there. It's like, why are the problems there? Don't nest, don't layer, make it simple. Make it simple in terms of how you fund, make it simple in terms of how you also create organizational solutions for missions themselves as well. Because otherwise it's easy to say, we have done all of these things all along, but why didn't you get the problem solved then? That's kind of the piece of the music as well, is that simplify the policy level, connect it real time to the projects at hand and the experimentation, and get towards the goal. And if you didn't get the goal, you failed. Whatever excuses you may have, whatever activities you may have in place, if you didn't get it, you failed, and that's it. Very simple feedback system.
It's very harsh. But yeah, government's very good on laying and strategies and sub-strategies and overlapping strategies and umbrella strategies. So following up on Pirit's comment, then yeah, for Neville, will the European Commission help us to not make so many strategies?
I love those comments by Perret. I understand completely this need to avoid over complexity. If I take just the example of the governance which we've set up for the missions, of course, one of the issues for us is trying to establish the means to work with member states and associated countries more effectively, connecting activities they may do as part of the EU missions approach. It was tempting to try and think about, well, do we need a new specific set of structures, committees, channels, spaces, all the rest of it to try and do that. And we concluded in the end that it was probably better just to try and work with what we've got, think about potentially where the gaps might be and fill those, but have a very responsive approach which can keep things under review. And that's where we are at the moment, essentially. So we are looking, we've got, the first 2 years, like I said, we're kind of launching the missions, getting the governance in place. We're now, if you want to be quite simple about it, building those portfolios and trying to create the kind of means for tracking, monitoring, which we will need both to be reflexive about the missions themselves, but also in a policy sense about how the, how the overall thing is going. I like the idea of competition as well. We certainly had competition in our missions from the start. There was a sort of discussion which we had about whether or not it would be better to launch just 3, because we don't know how this is going to work out. But in the end, of course, we went for 5. But it was always very competitive, and has been and probably will be, as to how they progressed. And I think many of you probably know that we had a step which we didn't anticipate, which was about building implementation plans for the missions, which in another discussion, probably not to be had now, is whether or not that actually was creating further difficulties for us so far as ensuring that open space, that competitive space. But let's not go into that. Anyway, insofar as we were developing those plans, it was always a nice thing to see how competitive it was between the colleagues as they looked across at each of the other missions progressing and learning from those as they went forward.
Okay, so competition among different teams also. From the legislation perspective, we can expect that something is out of that is going to come from European Commission, right?
Well, are you asking me to speculate how we go from here in the next 2 years? Well, I can say very concretely we have a review taking place 2023, literally only 2 years or less than 2 years after the missions have started. Of course, we won't have very clear evidence of progress against the sorts of things we've funded, but we will have a chance to look at all of the setup we've achieved and whether or not we've got the right things in place to actually expect those developments to take place. I just mentioned portfolio building. We're really at the early stages of that, and we've been spending a lot of time working with member states. I had a chance to speak with some Latvian colleagues earlier on about your own governance setups and how we can share some of that experience, which we're sort of now starting to see in different contexts. So we're going to support a mutual learning exercise over the next year or so, 2 years, to look at the sorts of features which are working in different places, and already there's something valuable coming out of that. I've mentioned portfolios, and I've also mentioned monitoring. So I think that's the sort of the kind of timeline of things that will take place over the next 2 years or so.
Thank you very much. So far, what we've learned, we have to have total transparency of information. We have to have a total alignment between different small and agile teams. We have to have the funding in place so the innovation can happen. And we also have to be ready to fail and learn from the failures. And therefore, we have to have clear KPI, because otherwise you don't know did you fail or not if you don't know where do you want to go. So the question is, if the government would be run like that, to the private sector, to the John. If the government would be run like this, small agile teams, knowing where do we go, innovate along the way, how's the Google perspective? Would Google be interested to collaborate more or collaborate less?
We like collaborating. We enjoy collaborating. We learn, the user learns. But I think the point that really resonates with me is if you constrain resource. So one of the things we have is we have our own internal incubator called Area 120. We limit their budget, we limit their headcount, and we limit their time on purpose. Why? Typically more than 6 people struggle to collaborate at speed, typically, because you start getting boards of boards and things of like this. The second thing is you limit their time to 6 months. So you said in 6 months you could achieve this, we'll review it and see how you've done. And then go to an extra 6 months. The thing we've got to separate is innovation isn't scaling. What we've got to realise that innovation has to be fast, which has been brilliantly articulated, and actually we learn from that. The scaling part is hard, but it's also achievable. Industry does scaling well. And I think what we're going to hopefully see going forward is that we admit that we've got to go quicker, which means we've got to constrain the resource to make it more agile. But then when we get success, we need to know we have assurance it will scale. So we're not then having barriers to adoption. You know, there's a lot of industry that come up with amazing ideas, but they don't know how to then scale it. So what I would like to see is, yes, Google is open for business. We're always wanting to collaborate. We believe very strongly that we need to do this together. If you look at all of the programs that we invest in, the way that we're doing sustainability, it's one about a community. It's not one about an individual organization. But what we want to do is go faster. And I think if we can work together in more collaboration between governments, private sector, education, and we can have a common outcome with a clear mission statement, then absolutely.
Right. So what we need is Area 120, right? That's the correct name?
Yeah, we could call it the Free Seas Incubator or something like that.
Free Seas Incubator.
Yeah, no. Well, this region's so diverse. I mean, the beauty of here is that, you know, why I love coming here is such a diverse ecosystem. And one of the things we've got to remember is there's 3 things that struggles adoption. One is biased, that we have a belief or a bias in us. The second is the beliefs, e.g. it will or won't fail before we even start. And then we have culture, and it's a very rich culture here. What we've got to do is include more people in there to have a more diverse view, because the people that are going to be using this technology and having this technology are diverse. The people in this audience are diverse. We've got to make sure we're more inclusive of the diverse world that we live in. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we have like 110 million people around this region, 3C.
Yep.
So that's quite diverse. And getting to the point, if back to Rainer, if we would have the, I don't know, incubator, 3Cs incubator, 120 3Cs incubator, but the point of view is that the small agile teams with the funding, with limited time, with clear goals, we have 3 directions. Would that help to attract more investment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Whether that in itself would actually change the investment decision, I think it can to a certain extent, and I think it also really depends on the types of missions the region is actually trying to solve. And of course, there are certain limits, even though you can argue that 110 million people around the region is a lot of people, and it's a big enough market. But that really depends on whether you're able to set attractive missions for businesses to come along as well. And you know, if you look at around the world, we maybe now have more than 200 missions, 250 missions around the world. So there is a, you know, governments are innovating around missions, but also cities, of course, increasingly as well. And not only in Europe, but you see in Latin America, you see in Australia. So there's lots of variety going on. I think at the moment, as well as doing your own missions, what is really key is actually to learn from others as well, what works and what doesn't work. And indeed, in not only in terms of galvanizing your public sector and making public sector work better, which is, you know, fundamentally really important, but actually also whether you're able to attract entrepreneurs and companies outside of the region, and particularly whether you're able to sort of adapt within the global, you know, crisis emanating from the war in Ukraine and a lot of the sort of the reshaping of the industrial value chain. And I think that's what probably the government should do at the moment as well, is maybe to actually rethink some of their mission activities in the light of the changing security situation, particularly in Europe, as that may open up additional windows of opportunity around clean energy, but also around reshoring some of the production from Asia. And so I think there might be actually need for, again, go for, you know, next step of ambition, actually thinking about, it's fine and good to look at the EU level of missions, but maybe actually the region should go even more ambitious, because that might actually be what attracts investors and brings back some of the production that have been outsourced over the last 30 years.
So more missions, smaller in the size, but spot on target?
Yeah, I would say more ambitious missions. I think that's what might be at the moment tactically the best thing to do for governments.
All right. Okay, on ambitious missions, I have to get back to Vinova and Joanna. Yeah, how to for ambitious missions you need funding, and how to work with the private sector to fund the ambitious missions. Are they ready to put the money, let's say, in the blind? Because for innovating part, you don't know what's the end gonna be and what's the end result gonna be. So how's your experience in that area?
I think the interest from the private sector has been large. Of course, it's tricky to invite to a party where you don't know what's going to happen, sort of. But if you find a way of constructing attractive missions that actually resonate with people and what they want to achieve, you get something extra from that process that adds sort of wanting to be part of a movement, and that includes the private sector and the private sector's money as well. But I think when it comes to orchestrating portfolios of projects, of instruments and things like that, you need to have a bit of an idea of the future, what's going to happen, and it can change, but you can have sort of a hypothesis on how things will play out. And then it's easier for both governmental agencies and private sector to get involved.
Right. So movement is something that that is trying that forward. If you get the private sector join the movement, it's easier to work with them. So question to the period. 3 C's, 3 topics. So energy, transport logistics, digitalization, and current geopolitical crisis. Can you create a movement out of that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have the energy crisis that has accelerated. I think we are all feeling it in our wallets at the moment, and it's going to get tougher and tougher for businesses and for people in Europe, unbelievably so as well. So I think it creates an urgency and really a demand for those solutions as well. And it creates a great urgency within the electorate space as well, in a sense that politicians will get activated, and politicians and investment will get activated through it, because every single one of us, be it business or private consumer, is going to be affected, especially in this energy space, which means that, as Rainer was saying as well, is that it's a great, unbelievable accelerator for green technologies and the energy transformation as such. And it's such a huge, wide problem, it's going to create a huge market. So whoever is getting their first of different solutions is actually going to get great aims. And this kind of security crisis is actually translating into these different fields or different 3 topics that you were talking about as well, because it's fundamentally, it's shifting the value chain that we are working with, where we are buying food, food systems and food systems change, transportation systems change as well, in a sense that we can use the crisis in a positive manner as an accelerator of innovation. An accelerator of innovation and investment going into those areas as well. And the more we can actually focus on this crisis moment and use the urgency in a wise way, the faster we can move, the faster we can say that let's get these problems solved. And there are a lot of business models and opportunities that come from that perspective of solving and using that crisis as wisely as possible.
Right. So what you're saying is the energy bill that I'm going to receive maybe in November
absolutely
is going to be helping me to join the movement.
Absolutely. And it's going to get the ear of the minister as well, who is going to get calls from not only businesses, but everybody who is going to feel the pain. And that pain is going to be positively, hopefully, moved towards innovation and solving this, because it needs to get solved, because we have other bills to pay as well outside of the energy bill.
All right. So what you're saying that if now we look at the current pain and current crisis that is going on, that we know that is going to hit society in all the 3Cs region, and mostly, firstly, through the energy, and then maybe some kind of next steps. If we create small agile teams with funding, limited time, and time is very limited because 6 months we don't even have the 6 months. But the idea is that if the government would be able to move forward, to redefine and restructure the missions and figure out how to go with that. The question is then to John, if this is something that the 3Cs countries are working on, and we say, okay, we see the problem, we have the movement, because everybody wants to receive smaller electricity bill, not the bigger one, and we're on, and we really wanna achieve it. Is, let's say, Google in? And
yeah, I mean, the thing about it is that I work across all of the different groups. The like my era that were born before technology that we have today, the era that were born in technology, and the era that seemed to be born with technology, and vice versa. But the one thing that's important is we want to be clear on our role in this, because our role is to support and enable people to do this and to use the scale of our organization. But we've also got to understand that we've got to make sure it's open to all people to join. There can't be barriers of adoption. One of the strategic decisions we took is to make sure that open technology is used in all cases. Because what we want to do is have a bigger ecosystem working together. Because we're going to need new skills going forward. We're going to need academia, governments, and organizations, especially industrial organizations, to collaborate on a common platform, because we can't no longer do this in isolation. And I think that the collaboration that we can provide in the scale, and if you look at what we're doing, I mean, I don't know if people are aware, there's a data group that called Kaggle.com, which is actually an open data community that allow data, and it's the largest data community, I think, in the world, where people can do research with data in an open way and actually collaborate with each other. We've got to get the collaboration working without the thinking that there's barriers to that collaboration. If we remove the barriers and we collaborate, absolutely, we've got to do it together.
Yeah, but also on collaboration, we collaborate well when the resources are plenty, and we collaborate not that well when the resources are scarce. And therefore, this my let's say follow-up question on this is, currently the resources are plenty, but we know they're going to be scarce. So we have to collaborate now, not later on, because that's going to be way harder. We saw that the same happening in COVID-19. When COVID-19 hit, everybody closed down the borders, everybody protected whatever assets they have. No travel, nothing, no, and then slowly we understood, okay, how to collaborate, and went back. So again, to not get there in the situation, as far as I understand from the Google, what I can hear, if we call you Monday and say, hey, we're creating the Area 120 for Latvia, you're in.
Yeah, well, why wait until Monday?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
The week's only just started.
Perfect.
Why waste 4 days?
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
From my point of view, yeah, I mean, we want to work. We want to share what we've learned, but we also want to understand clearly what you want to do and how you want to operate. I think what's key here, that we don't want barriers of interaction. We want to be here supporting and making sure. But the key message, we want the group to work together without it being big ink, little ink. The wonderful thing about this region is the SME community. There's an amazing amount of small, medium enterprises that exist in this region that, can scale together. The result is not Google coming in and owning the solution or owning the problem, etc. We've got to do it together, and we've got to because the solutions of the future will come from the niche experts of that industry or that problem statement. And we want to make sure they get the biggest bang for the buck.
Okay.
Or euro.
So, yeah, we have just a couple minutes, sadly, a couple of minutes to go, and therefore maybe the one question to everybody, and let's try to be, I don't know how brief, in 2 minutes each. The question is very simple. So today we figured out that the mission is helping to drive the innovation. You have to have clear KPIs, clear goal. So you have to have funding, you have to have small agile teams, total transparency of information, and we're so all the teams can share. And then you innovate and see and don't know what's going to happen in the party. Right. So the question is, can you comment, after all this that we went through, we aligned our mindsets, but still, why mission-oriented approach and why missions? And from your each perspective. Now I'll start with Neville from European Commission. So why missions?
Well, I think it was a natural continuation of the things we were doing before. It focused on impacts. It addressed the societal challenges which were most important, which have been a key element of the funding for research and innovation. It addressed a deficit or a perceived deficit that we would not being as effective as we ought to be in terms of making connections between research and innovation and all the policy support and programs which are available elsewhere and linking with the member states. So in a sense, you know, these are all win-wins. You know, it's delivering, it's being innovative, it's engaging with society. I think the logic behind it is compelling. The challenge is still, though, to how to make all of those moving parts work. There are lots of moving parts in the system, not only the fact we've got 5 missions working together. So you have to be open, you accept this experimental quality about the process, and you have to, of course, be prepared to hold your hand up and accept when things aren't working exactly as you originally planned. So to answer your question, why missions? I think that the logic is you know, all of the elements which contribute towards this. It's about delivering impact. It's about meeting citizens' aspirations, and it's about being effective.
Thank you, Rainer. Same question.
Well, I think, you know, there are a number of answers, but I think the key to that is that if we are continuing at business as usual as we do today, the future will be very bleak. You know, look at India, look at France, the temperatures that are rising. You know, many areas of the planet will be uninhabitable for people. So it's really about planetary survival in many cases that we're talking about here. But when we look at from the, you know, perspective of economics, we see that in many countries there is a declining investment. If you look at UK, for instance, and across Europe, you see that both private and public sector are actually investing less in the economy. And that is also another reason to actually try to galvanize both sectors to collaborate more. And, you know, finally, I think we can't really afford to have such a siloed governments as we have now. Governments have become incredibly siloed and incredibly difficult to coordinate those various actors in the government. So these 3 reasons, I think, should be enough.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So breaking out of the silos. John, why missions?
Well, our business is run by these type of missions all the time. You know, we call it Moonshot inside Google. I think the key here is that we've got to be clear on what we're wanting to do together. We've got to understand each other's roles. And we've got to go fast. And then all the aspects we talked about today about small, agile teams, monitoring results, making sure we're improving along the way. Absolutely.
Thank you. Johanna.
I would say one of the aspects is that it's been really fun working this way. As a bureaucrat, trying new ways of exploring how to do what we do better is interesting and fun and rewarding. So I think that's one good reason. But also that missions can be like an umbrella for the collaboration that we need, cross-sectoral, with the clear directionality, top-down, bottom-up mix. It could sort of help with the issues that we see with the way we fund innovation today and reach further than we have. And that's also satisfying for those who take part of our funding that sometimes become a bit frustrated with not reaching the whole way, for example, with policy questions and stuff. So things that we as agencies can help out with. So that's one reason for us, I think.
All right, so far we heard the innovation part that the missions help to innovate. Then we heard the part that actually the missions can help to attract investment and in the longer run help us to survive on this planet. Then we heard that the missions help to create the moonshots and actually, let's say, achieve maybe shed shot, maybe castle shot, or some kind of average shot, but still. And then we heard that obviously the stretching part is important, that you can stretch your goal, you can push yourself further than you figured out, and obviously it's fun for clergy. That's fantastic. However, fun for clergy, investment part and sustainable goal part is quite a difficult sell for the average citizen in 3Cs region. So the same question, but as very practical. The period you said you're very practical. What is spot on? So the average citizen living somewhere in the 3Cs region, somebody tells him, "Hey, we are now on a mission to be green on the energy, sustainable on energy." What would be? How can you frame it? Like, why mission?
Well, I think the answer is very simple. Your energy bill in November is going to be less than it was before. That's why we need a mission. I'm not going to say this in this bureaucratic language about green technology and green transformation. I'm talking about the mission that will affect your wallet and will affect the inputs of the companies themselves. And that is a very practical way, and it's about communication. Be clear in what you want to achieve. Don't talk about carbon neutrality, this and this, but talk about what it actually means to people. And then they say, yeah, invest as much as you want to invest to get the work done. We had wonderful missions with COVID-19, mission warp speed to get to the vaccine, because we all understood this, because in this room people have been coughing and we are not running out of the room. I've been coughing and not running out of the room, because we understand this, because we needed the vaccine, we needed the solution to actually be here together today. So learn to communicate the missions in a very practical way that it shows, why should I care about this? And then the citizen, and then the electorate, and then the business will tell you, invest, experiment, do what must, fail. But I want my energy bill to be a little bit less. I want to have, to buy my daughter a birthday gift or a birthday gift or a Christmas present at the end of the year too. So go ahead.
I would say this is awesome summary. Very clear energy bill. Do you want to be able to afford it? Yes, that's my mission. Thank you, the panelists. This was my pleasure. That was fantastic. Thank you very much.